Story recapped here. Today I'm gonna explain a fantasy, horror, and thriller movie called Tumbbad. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. One day, Vinayak Rao tells his young son Pandurang about the ancient tale of the goddess of prosperity. The goddess symbolizes the abundance of gold and food, and the world lies within her womb. As the universe came to be, she gave birth to 160 million gods, and Hastar, her firstborn offspring, became her favorite among them. Despite his mother's benevolence, Hastar was full of greed that he successfully stole all her gold and planned on stealing all of her food next. But as he reached to steal the food, the other gods attacked him, and Hastar was torn into fragments. Before the greedy god dissolved into stardust, the goddess saved him. However, this is under one condition. He can never be worshipped by mortals, and he is to be forgotten forever. So for eons, Hastar peacefully resided in his mother's womb, until one day, the villagers of Tumbbad, where Hastar lies, invoked the slumbering god and created a shrine in his name. Since then, the wrath of all the gods fell on Tumbbad, and the village became cursed with a never-ending rain. Back in 1918, Vinayak used to live in the small village of Tumbbad, Maharashtra, with his mother and young brother Sadashiv. Vinayak's mother is a mistress for an ailing man named Sarkar, a local lord that owns a huge mansion. The two boys are also illegitimate children of the old man, yet they live very poorly. One rainy afternoon, their mother heads to the mansion to offer her intimate services to the old man. She proceeds to pleasure him in hopes of receiving the gold coin kept in Hastar's statue, but Sarkar always says that it must be earned. In the back of her head, she knows that she must make him finish quickly because she has other important matters to tend to. Back at home, Vinayak and Sadashiv are very concerned about who would feed their great-grandmother, who is chained and locked up in a dark room. The feeding time soon approaches, so without waiting for their mother, the two brothers initiate feeding her themselves. Originally, Vinayak plans to feed their great-grandmother, but because he's afraid, he sends Sadashiv instead. However, before Sadashiv enters the room, their mother appears and stops the young man from doing this dangerous task. She prepares the food again and proceeds to feed the old woman herself. A few days later, Sarkar dies, and their mother decides to leave Tumbbad for Pune. Vinayak, on the other hand, wishes to stay because he thinks that there is treasure hidden somewhere in the mansion. He explains that they can wake up their great-grandmother and ask her where the treasure lies. However, his mother irritably explains that Sarkar spent his whole life searching for a treasure that doesn't exist, and he has wasted all his ancestral wealth for it. This strengthens his mother's will to flee the village, leaving Vinayak with no choice but to agree. She also decides to abandon their great-grandmother, since she is no longer her responsibility. Disappointed, Vinayak heads outside and talks to his brother, who is up in a tree. Suddenly, he hears a thud and finds that Sadashiv has fallen to the ground and has hit his head on a boulder. Upon knowing this, their mother immediately attempts to bring him to a doctor, but leaves Vinayak behind to feed their grandmother. Before their departure, she tells Vinayak to call out Hastar's name if something happens. Unfortunately, Sadashiv dies on the way to the doctor, so their mother redirects the carriage to the mansion to acquire the gold coin. Back at home, Vinayak prepares the old woman's food, but later gets summoned to enter her room. Upon opening the door, he finds that his great-grandmother doesn't look human at all. He observes her even more and realizes that her skin is rotten. Her eyes are all white, and her jaws are locked with sharp nails. Although he's scared, he bravely asks his great-grandmother where the treasure is, but she says he must feed her first, and she'll reveal everything. Suddenly, Vinayak's blood runs cold when his great-grandmother says that she will eat him, and it so happens that he can't remember the name that he's supposed to call out. The old woman manages to chain Vinayak's foot and proceeds to drag him around the house. Finally, they reach a corner, and she pulls a nail out of her jaw to allow herself to eat the young boy's face. Luckily, Vinayak remembers his mother's words and quickly invokes Hastar's name. Within a split second, his great-grandmother falls to the ground and sleeps. A few moments after, his mother returns, and they both leave for Pune the next day. Despite Vinayak's protest, his mother forces him to swear that he'll never go back to Tumbbad ever again. Later on, she gives him Sarkar's gold coin. 15 years later, Vinayak, now a man, goes back to his old house in Tumbbad. Surprisingly, his great-grandmother is still alive. However, the ground has eaten her, and she has a tree growing out of her body. He then asks his grandmother about the treasure in the mansion and promises to split the loot with her. However, she wants nothing to do with it because she only wishes her suffering to end. The old woman knows that Vinayak longs to find the treasure, so she warns him about the dangers of the curse that can turn him into a monster like her. Soon after, she reveals where the treasure is, and Vinayak successfully finds it. Then, he delivers his promise by setting his great-grandmother on fire. After completing his goal, Vinayak returns to his wife, whom he left in Pune. The next day, he meets up with an opium merchant, Raghav, to pay off his debts. He gives him a gold coin, and Raghav is curious about where he got it. However, Vinayak simply explains that it's ancestral. Now, every time he needs money, Vinayak simply goes back to Tumbbad to steal the gold coins. Over time, Vinayak quickly grows rich and acquires plenty of possessions from his stolen wealth. Not long after, his wife gives birth to a healthy baby boy, whom he named Pandurang. Meanwhile, Raghav's business with the British is slowly going bankrupt, so he sells his widowed daughter-in-law to Vinayak as a concubine. The concubine then tells Vinayak of Raghav's plan to loot the mansion in Tumbbad, so he formulates a plan to trap the merchant into descending to the goddess womb. Vinayak's scheme goes as planned, and Raghav goes down the well unprepared. Inside, Raghav finds a wall made out of flesh, and it pulsates like it's alive. Curious, he observes the place even more and eventually stumbles upon a metal canister containing a doll made out of dough. As he holds the doll, he suddenly hears a growl from a distance and gets attacked. Not long after, Vinayak climbs down the well and sees that Raghav is merged to the wall, looking like a rotting monster just like his great-grandmother. He is now sure that by touching Hastar, the person becomes cursed. Not long after, Vinayak creates a circle made out of flour around him and proceeds to summon the god with his dough doll. He once learned from his great-grandmother that Hastar was hungry for such a long time because he was unable to steal his mother's food. So, he desires food but cannot touch raw flour. With this information, Vinayak uses his dough doll as a distraction while he swipes at Hastar's loincloth containing the loot, and quickly picks up the golden coins falling on the ground. This explains how Vinayak became so rich. Before heading back up, he decides to end Raghav's suffering by setting him on fire. 14 years later, Vinayak became old and weak. He is no longer as swift as before and exhausts himself with the most basic tasks. For this reason, he trains his young son Pandurang to do the same task he did in Tumbbad, in hopes that the young boy can take his place. However, Pandurang always disappoints his father, making the young boy desperate to earn his praise. Meanwhile, their household has undergone huge changes, for Vinayak's concubine has been given more importance than the wife, who is now treated like a maid. It also seems like he has told his family about the treasure in Tumbbad, because his wife has been making plenty of dough dolls in preparation for his next visit. One day, Vinayak brings Pandurang to Tumbbad to train him in stealing Hastar's gold. Before they descend into the goddess womb, he tells the young man not to bring the dough doll down, for they're only practicing. Pandurang, not paying attention to his father's warning, brings the dough doll with him, causing Hastar to attack. They barely make it out alive, but Pandurang still manages to steal some gold coins from Hastar. Though the young boy is proud of his achievement, Vinayak is not pleased and proceeds to beat his son for being so foolish and careless. The next day, they return to Pune, and Pandurang's mother interrogates him on what truly happened in Tumbbad. The young boy refuses and tells his mother to focus on household chores. Offended, the woman slaps Pandurang, forcing him to show her the gold coin he got from Hastar. Meanwhile, Vinayak meets up with some businessmen who inform him that he needs to improve his status by buying a new mansion. Vinayak simply tells them that he has one in Tumbbad, which became his after Sarkar died. However, he doesn't have any legitimate papers to prove that it's his property, so the government is now claiming it as theirs. Later on, Vinayak tells his son about the situation in Tumbbad and shows him a safe full of gold and money. The next day, Vinayak beats Pandurang. It turns out that the young boy gifted his father's concubine with a golden coin and has told her that he plans on marrying her when he grows up. This angers his father, so Pandurang blurts out that they should steal Hastar's loincloth instead of picking up the coins, just so he could stop beating him. He also suggests that they should make multiple dough dolls to buy them more time. Vinayak is convinced by this brilliant plan and soon makes arrangements to return to Tumbbad. Before their departure, Vinayak brings Pandurang to the local brothel, while his wife prepares plenty of flour for the dough dolls. Not long after, they return to Tumbbad and descend into the goddess womb. However, they are horrified upon knowing that Hastar multiplies according to the number of dough dolls that they possess. Seeing that there is no hope to ensure his son's safety, Vinayak makes a fatherly sacrifice and ties all the dough dolls on his body to use himself as bait. Pandurang cries and tries to stop his father, but Vinayak's mind has been set. Soon after, all the Hastars that followed him had turned into dust since they made contact with the raw flower circle. Once the coast is clear, Pandurang proceeds to exit the womb and takes a moment to breathe when he steps into the outside world. Suddenly, he hears his father's voice, finding that he has turned into a monster just like the curse says. Vinayak calls out his son and presents Hastar's loincloth in hopes of fulfilling their mission in Tumbbad. But Pandurang, now weeping upon his father's state, refuses to accept his offering. With a heavy heart, the young boy knew that he must set his father on fire to end his agony. He carries out his plan, and his father screams in pain. So Pandurang tells him to sleep or else Hastar will come after him. Finally, Vinayak closes his eyes, and Pandurang leaves Tumbbad.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.